Okay, and I know a couple people emailed me that they'll be a few minutes late, but good morning, everyone, and welcome to our May Open Research Office. Today, our topic is Study Startup, Industry-Sponsored Studies, and our speaker is CV Candifer, Clinical Research Associate. And CV, you can get started whenever. If you guys have any questions, you can just ask them as CV is speaking. You can either put them in the chat and I'll watch the chat, or you can just use the raise hand motion, but you can start whenever.
Okay, so most of you probably know me. I work currently in the clinical research office. And so today we're just going to review the study startup process here at UB for industry-sponsored studies. So these are, clinical trials, observational studies, registries. The talk is geared mostly towards study coordinators and regulatory staff. So you're all probably familiar with the process. You've probably done it many times, but hopefully you pick up like a tip or two just to make things go, a bit more smoothly. So for the sake of this talk, we are going to sort of skip over feasibility. So this is where you may or may not have uploaded a confidentiality disclosure agreement or a non-disclosure agreement into Click Agreements. So maybe you got this, maybe you didn't. If you did, the PI cannot sign the CDA or NDA. That really needs to be signed by somebody on behalf of the university. So sometimes now companies will just send a link and it'll take you just to like a couple paragraphs about confidential information. And then the PI just like clicks a box or types their name. That is technically the NDA and they're really not supposed to do that. And if that's what you're seeing, it's okay to request a Word document from whoever sent you the email and just say, our institution requires an institution signature. Please send a Word doc. And they usually do. And then you can upload that into Click for your PI. So if you don't have an option to submit that, so even if you did the trick where you listed yourself as the PI and then you gave yourself PI proxy access, if you have done that and you still don't have the submit option after you've changed the PI name, you can just email me and let me know, and then I can click submit for you. So you maybe got a CDA or NDA, maybe it was activated in Click, maybe you received a feasibility survey. So, these are the surveys that asks about your patient population. How many patients do you have with this disease? How many fit inclusion criteria? How many can you screen? How many can you enroll? It asks questions usually about IRBs, turnaround times, contract turnaround times. So you maybe filled this out or maybe you didn't. Recently, there was a document released. It was an FAQ when completing feasibility questionnaires. It was sent to a few listservs. If you saw that, great. If you don't and you want it, let me know and I can send it to you. I don't think this is posted anywhere, so just ask and we can send that out. And you may or may not have had a pre-site selection visit or a site qualification visit. All of these things sometimes happen before you get a study, sometimes they don't. But for the sake of this talk, you have been selected. We're talking from the point where you get that email saying your site has been selected to participate in the study. So once you get that, if you are a coordinator or regulatory staff, you have a lot of paperwork to do. You're collecting documents for central study registration, for your budget, contract, billing compliance, IRB. You're collecting paperwork for the sponsor. And if you are working at an affiliate, there are also affiliate documents that need to be completed. And a lot of this is driven by the logistics of your study. Who are your staff? What resources do you need? Do you need to purchase services like labs or imaging? Do you need to buy equipment? Do your staff need EMR access? Where is your study being conducted? That's going to drive the answers to some of these questions, which comes from who are you enrolling, right? Where are you finding them? How are you identifying your participants? How are you letting them know about the study? So the first step really for UB is CSR. This is the first place you want to enter your study. So the look of this is going to change. The look will probably stay the same. but you will start seeing some new questions in CSR with the integration into Epic. So this is May 2026 right now. At the end of this month, Kaleida is transitioning to Epic. And then in the fall, ECMC and the UBMD practice plans will transition. So you will begin to see some new questions related to Epic Access and to services that are going, services or resources from Epic facilities that will need to be built into Epic. So you'll start to see some changes here. Changes or not, it's really important that you are entering that sponsor provided protocol, your agreement template, and your draft budget. So these are really the three documents that the CRO needs to sort of get the ball rolling on your study. There's also a mandatory required field for an informed consent form. And if you have that, great. But if you don't, you can upload a placeholder. But try not to upload placeholders for the protocol, the agreement, or the budget, because these are really the crucial documents needed to start processing your study. And if you have any other relevant documents, FDA letters, device manuals, draft purchase agreements, those things can be uploaded here as well. And if you upload them here, we will put them into Click IRB for you. So you don't have to upload them in both places. But if they're not here, you will have to upload them into Click. And just a side note, if you were in CSR and you hit that submit button and the form disappears, it's because you're not listed as a study contact. So if there's anybody that you want to see, want to be able to see this form, just make sure they're listed as a study contact, because if they're not, then it disappears. And if that happens, just let us know and we can add that person or add you as a study contact. So other things that are really important in CSR is, what IRB are you using? Will it be UB or central IRB? And if it's a central IRB, which one? Where is your study being done? Now, you don't have to know every location, but enter the locations you do know. And again, if you are going to be using services or procedures at a facility that is moving to Epic, you're going to have extra questions, and it will be important to know this early, because this will need to be kind of built into the EMR. So that will take some time to set up. We ask that you list your study team members. Again, you don't have to know who everybody is. This is kind of the first thing that you're doing. Enter the people that you do know. Know that when you enter people that we do check if they've completed their COI disclosure, if they have done their city training, and we will be checking for Epic Access. So the more people you list here, the sooner we can give you a heads up if somebody needs to complete training. Because, you sometimes takes months to go to IRB, and then you submit an IRB and IRB says, hey, this person needs to do their training. And you think, oh, if I would have known that earlier, I would have had them do it. We will check if you list them here. And these people get put right into Click IRB. So then you don't need to add them later. And if somebody doesn't show up, so the naming convention is last name, comma, first name. If you enter them that way and they don't show up, you can just use free text. They'll just be listed as non-UB staff. And if somebody is going to need Epic Access that you know of once we transition, you can add that, add the comment on that separate comment page that this person is going to need Epic Access. And of course, you can request extra services or resources, like if you want help with recruitment. So once you enter your study into CSR, CRO staff perform a quick review for any obvious questions and ensure that IRB entry hasn't been started. And then we load, and this is usually me, so I usually load the study from CSR into Click to get that Click IRB number. So we're creating the submission in Click, but we are not submitting it. And then we'll also upload any agreements into Click Agreements. The CRO can also offer assistance with identifying needed services and locations. So again, if you need labs or imaging and you're not really sure where to go, please reach out and we can, figure out what will work for you. And the CRO also has negotiated research rates with a lot of our affiliates and vendors. So if you call Kaleida Labs and say, give me a price on this panel, they will quote you a price. It's probably going to be more than the negotiated research rate that the CRO has. So if you are looking for pricing, please go through the CRO. It will most likely save you money because of those, pre-existing negotiated research rates. We can also help with budget negotiation, purchase agreements. If you have a device study, you will need a purchase agreement sometimes, and we can help with that. So basically, you enter your study into central study registration, and that begins that parallel processing of routing your contract and budget to who they need to go to, getting your coverage analysis done. It really starts the ball rolling at UB. So the sooner you do this, the sooner we can start. So once you've entered your study into CSR, you've got a lot of other paperwork to do. And this is in no particular order. So I'm not suggesting do it in this order. This is just the way we're talking about it today. But besides CSR, for UB, this is just kind of a list. We'll go through them one by one, but you will need billing compliance documents. You'll get an Encore calendar sent to you from the CRO. We'll ask you to verify that it's accurate. You'll work with the CRO to complete a coverage analysis. You'll need a finalized budget that the CRO will have to sign off on whether they're negotiating it or not. And of course, your finalized contract. Whether you're using a local or central IRB, you will need to complete a UB fee form. You'll verify that the subject compensation in your consent form is consistent with your budget, and verify that your research-related injury language in your consent form is consistent with your contract and is basically verbatim the research-related injury language in the 502. And when I say verbatim, I mean the entire section. Don't put anything else in there. If the sponsor has language, take it out, move it to a different section. Keep that 502 language in your consent form. If you're using a central IRB, you'll also need an HRP 907. This is a request to utilize a commercial IRB. That gets sent from the CRO and the PI signs it. You'll need a reliance agreement where you'll actually download this from Click. It'll be partially signed by UB. You'll send it to the central IRB, and then they'll sign it. You will sometimes have to ask for it back and then upload that fully executed reliance agreement in Click. And again, incorporate required UB template language into your central IRB consent form. So the Encore calendar, which comes from our CTMS system, right? This is a calendar built from the schedule of events in the protocol. The purpose of this is really to track subject enrollment and the invoiceable study activities. So for industry, you're really entering per patient activities and all your study details. So you're logging in, you're checking off the visits were done. If you've had monitor visits or you're processing safety reports, all of those invoiceable costs also get entered here. And this is so the CRO can invoice the sponsors based on what you enter into Encore. The Encore calendar, again, is sent to you from the CRO, and it's important that you verify that it's accurate. And as we move into working with Epic, this is going to be really important because you're going to see this calendar basically in Epic as well. So the process is going to be Encore. You're going to enter your research activities into Encore, and then that is going to feed into Epic. And eventually the billing will be driven through Epic. So making sure this is accurate is going to become really, really important. This is what a sample Encore calendar looks like. Most of you have probably seen this. You have these study activities on the left and then the visits, which those occur on the right. So again, this is what's going to come to you. You're just going to want to check it against the schedule of events. You're going to want to make sure that everything is captured here that's going to be happening at every visit. Like sometimes protocols, you still read the footnotes, you have to actually read the body of the protocol because other things are happening at visits that aren't listed here. This isn't always a comprehensive list. So it's nice to know, what will be happening at every visit and have it built in here. So after your calendar is done, then you'll begin to work with the CRO on your coverage analysis. This is the financial review of clinical events specified in the protocol to see which will be reimbursed by the study and which will be reimbursed by standard of care, whether it's insurance, Medicare, Medicaid. So if your subjects are having an MRI, they would have it whether they were in the study or not. It's part of standard of care. They were going to get it. You're just using the results for your research. That MRI gets billed to their third-party payer. But if they're having the MRI just for the research, like they wouldn't get it if they weren't in the study. That MRI gets billed to the study. So the coverage analysis is really reviewing all those activities and making sure you know how each thing will be billed for. But this is required to be performed pursuant to federal clinical trial policy. So UV's not trying to just give you more work. We really need to let our affiliates know how to bill for these research activities, and we want to be compliant with federal policy. And this coverage analysis does currently feed into our current billing system, which is CRMS. That's what we're using now. Eventually, it will be Epic. So for people who have active studies and you are entering your activities into CRMS, and now you're going to go live with Epic, you're going to continue to use CRMS for now. There'll probably be a transition period where we use both CRMS and Epic, but the goal is eventually to just be billing through Epic. But for now, continue to use CRMS. This is what a sample coverage analysis looks like. So a lot like your Encore calendar, but you can see which activities are being billed to the study and then which will be billed standard of care. Okay, so pop quiz. If you have your phone, you can just scan this QR code and answer, why do I enter subject data into Encore? Is it to be compliant with federal policy? Is it so the CRO can invoice the sponsor for study activities? Or so the CRO can expect payment for performed research activities? Or B and C? So you should not have to log in or anything. It should just take you right to the question. Anybody wants to answer that? I know I never wait long enough for people to do this. What do we think? Okay, ready? Yeah, B and C, right. It's both. Okay, so why do I complete a coverage analysis and enter subject data into CRMS? Is it so affiliates know which services to bill to a research study and which to bill to a third-party payer? Is it to be compliant with federal policy, or A and B? Okay, it is A, yeah, A and B is the answer. So I know, like, it seems like we have so many systems and like you just keep entering the same thing. You're entering it into EDC, you're entering stuff into Encore, you enter stuff into CRMS, but there's kind of a different reason for all that. And hopefully once we transition to Epic, it'll be a bit more smooth and maybe one less system. So also you'll need a budget and contract, right? Remember, CRO can help obtain pricing because of those negotiated research rates and just our relationships with vendors and affiliates. We can also help negotiate that budget for you. So this is really a collaborative process. So even if you do ask the CRO to negotiate your budget, it's not like the CRO just goes off and does it. It is really a collaborative effort. And the CRO relies on your feedback to negotiate that budget. So we want to make sure that you are getting paid for the work that you do. And the earlier you engage the CRO in this process, sometimes, the faster it can go. There's sometimes additional things, again, that aren't in that schedule of events, sometimes things that aren't listed in your budget. But if you are, using portals for lab inventory or imaging, or you're using vendors and those vendors need to use portals, and have login information, and they need hours of training. Like, those are good things to know up front so you can build them into your budget and make sure everybody is getting paid for the time that they are spending to get this study up and running. Sometimes that means requesting lab manuals in advance or imaging manuals in advance to make sure you know what's really going to be expected of you. Because there's nothing worse than getting into a study and realize, like, this is taking so much longer and it's so much more work than we thought it was going to be. And now, like, we're not being paid enough to do all this work. So the sooner we can identify those things, the better, because we can recoup those costs. The CRO is also going to review budgets to make sure that all university fees and affiliate fees are included. So to begin enrollment, you do need a finalized budget signed off by the CRO so your agreement can be activated and click. So even once your contract is negotiated and ready to be signed off, it won't be finalized until that budget is signed off by the CRO. So even if you're not using the CRO to negotiate your budget, it does pass through here. So you want to make sure these costs are included. So to recap, you enter your study into CSR. The Encore team builds that schedule of events, the calendar from the schedule of events and the protocol. The calendar and the coverage analysis get sent to your team members to ensure that they're accurate and for your approval. That coverage analysis informs the budget template, so services and pricing can be requested. And then the CRO can work with you to start those negotiations, send the terms to the sponsor, and that final budget goes to the contract group for final sign-off, and it goes into Encore. Eventually, it will go into Epic. So once my site is selected, one of the first things I should do is complete protocol training, enter the study in CSR, or enter the study in Click. Yay, thank you. Yes, enter the study in CSR. It gets the ball rolling. Okay, almost done with UB documents, right? But IRB, if you use a local IRB, if you use UB IRB, look at the left of this slide. If you're using a local IRB, things that you're uploading in Click are the sponsor protocol, the site supplement, which is the HRP 508, the HRP 502 is the consent form. If you are using UB IRB, they really want the consent form on the 502 template, which means taking the sponsor template language and putting it into the 502, sending it to the sponsor for approval, and then submitting it to UB IRB. Probably a partial HIPAA waiver, at least, if not a regular HIPAA waiver, data collection materials, recruitment materials, other documents, and a fee form. So any of the items listed in blue are UB IRB forms, and they can be found in the Click library. And if you're using UB IRB, then you will receive IRB approval before you begin enrollment. If you're using a central IRB, look to the right of the slide. Here, you're uploading different things into Click. You're uploading that central IRB approval letter, the approved protocol and consent forms. Sometimes they want all the documents listed in your approval letter. That can vary depending on reviewer or on how many items are listed in your approval letter. The HRP 907 needs to be uploaded, and this you don't need to do. This gets sent to you after CSR. The PI signs it, and the CRO puts it in Click. It should already be there for you, so you really shouldn't have to upload that. It should be there. But you do need that fully signed reliance agreement, which means downloading it from Click, sending it to the central IRB, and uploading the fully signed agreement. And you still need a fee form. There is a one-time IRB fee at startup if you use a central IRB. So if you're using a central IRB before you begin enrollment, you get 2 emails from Click. One is a notice of reliance agreement confirmation, and the other is a notice of study activation. So you should really not begin enrolling until you get both of those emails from the UB IRB. And of course, Click Submit. That's my PSA. Always Click Submit. We always forget to, but do your best. So if you are working with an external IRB, UB IRB must agree to cede review and oversight to another IRB, and the reliance agreement needs to be signed by both a UB institutional official and the external IRB. And this starts in CSR, which is why we ask who your IRB of record will be, and if it's a central IRB, which one, because the reliance agreement template varies depending on the central IRB that you're using. And if any of these, okay, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't want to cut you off. There's a question in the chat.
Okay.
What about the fees that occur annually if you have a central IRB?
So there's no UB IRB reoccurring fee if you're using a central IRB. It's a one-time fee at startup.
Yeah.
So if you are using UB IRB as your IRB of record, then there are continuing review fees.
There's fees every year for that deal with the financial side. I just did a budget, and there's a bunch of fees that occur yearly from UB, even if you're central IRB.
Okay, those aren't IRB fees. So those are
Correct.
going to, yes. So those are different fees those are different fees that occur. They're not IRB fees. So those are going to occur whether you have a local IRB or a central IRB. You're going to get those fees no matter what. And that's part of making sure that the CRO reviews your budget. So those are included in your budget and covered by the sponsor, or included in your startup fees that will carry you through the study. But it's not an IRB fee, but it is a UB fee, if that makes sense. So if you are working with an external IRB and there's been a change in either your IRB or your PI, that 907 and reliance agreement does need to be updated. So just let us know and we'll just redo the paperwork. It doesn't always happen, but sometimes it does. So again, just let us know and we'll get the new forms completed. If you have questions about working with an external IRB, there's two SOPs in CLIC. There's the HRP 906 and the 908 that you can reference. So when you are working with external IRBs, it's the PI and the study team's responsibility to download that partially signed reliance agreement from CLIC IRB and then upload the fully signed reliance agreement back into CLIC. So central IRBs used to include that with your approval documents. I see that less and less now. You often have to email the central IRB and ask for that. Please return the fully signed reliance agreement. And they do, but you do sometimes have to ask. Okay. Also, it's your responsibility to incorporate the UB ICF template language into the external ICFs. So that is the research-related injury language. Again, this pretty much needs to be verbatim now, like no exceptions are allowed. And this language also has to match the contract, which can be sticky. I have seen WCG especially is now returning your templates, your consent templates, if the language does not match verbatim. And that could be something as simple as your sponsor's not paying for a research-related injury. And so you deleted that paragraph. If it doesn't match, they're kicking it back and asking for institutional sign-off. And if that happens, you can contact Jen Smith. She will be the institutional sign-off. The email might say, send it to Rich Corrales. Don't send it to Jen Smith. Other language that gets entered into the central ICF template is HIPAA language, advocate language, and you are always checking to make sure your subject reimbursement language matches what's in your budget. All these central IRB approval documents get uploaded into CLIC IRB. So does the fee form. And then you're going to make sure that CLIC study file is updated with any study modifications. So if you submitted protocol version A into CSR, that's what's going to be in CLIC. But now you're on protocol version B, then it's your job to upload B with your CLIC submission. If your study staff has changed between CSR and when you're ready to submit, you want to make sure that that's up to date. And then, of course, click submit. And before you begin enrollment, you should be receiving those two emails, the CLIC notification of reliance agreement confirmed and the notification of activation. And I'm sure all of you know this, but I'm just going to say, right, all of your recruitment materials need to be IRB approved. Anything that is any recruitment method or anything that is public facing, that is seen by people outside of your research team, must be approved. So if you're recruiting by review of medical records, databases, referrals, those methods need to be IRB approved. If you need a partial HIPAA waiver for recruitment, that's the HRP 611. If you're using UB IRB, usually with central IRBs, that language is kind of built into your submission. You want to make sure that you're noting you'll be doing that. Flyers, brochures, websites, all that gets IRB approved. And if you're using a central IRB, those things usually get submitted on your behalf. And you really only need to upload anything that is site specific. Like maybe you have your own, telephone screening script that you use. Then you would upload that if it's just for you. But the other things usually get submitted on your behalf with centrals. If you're using UB, it's your job to upload everything. Okay, true or false? The HRP 907 is another name for the Reliance Agreement. Let's see, what do we think? False, yes. I've seen a lot of confusion on this. That is really just a request to use a central IRB. That is a UB IRB form. That is a request to use a commercial IRB explicitly. So and this is not the topic of today's talk, but if you had a study that was funded by, NIH or a foundation, and you're working with U of Rochester or U of Missouri, and you're using their IRB, then you don't need a 907 because they're not a commercial IRB. This is just for the use of a commercial IRB. It's not the Reliance Agreement. That's a separate thing. Okay. That's all you need for UB, right? Like that's it. But in addition to those things that you need for UB, of course, the sponsor has documents that you need to complete. So it's going to vary per study, per sponsor, but in general, all of your study team members will need a CV signed and dated within the last 2 years, showing affiliation with UB and an affiliate if that's where you're doing the study. And ideally, it has page numbers. They don't have to have page numbers, but I have had CVs rejected by sponsors because they didn't have page numbers. So if you're working on a CV with somebody or you're doing yours, save your future self some work and just throw some page numbers on there. If somebody's licensed, you'll need a copy of that and a copy of everyone's GCP training certificate. UB does require like a list of city training. I'm sure you all know about that. Sponsors really want GCP training. And so that's the only training that I kept on file in reg binders, and that was good enough for the sponsor. In my experience, they're not concerned about the UB required training other than GCP. And of course, financial disclosure forms, if applicable, if you are working on a drug study and you're using a 1572, anyone listed on there needs to have a financial disclosure form on file. And so that depends on your study and your study role. So in addition to that, the PI needs to have all those documents. The PI will also be signing a protocol signature page, a financial disclosure form, the UB fee form. If you're using a central IRB, the PI is also signing that 907. If you've got a drug study, they're signing the 1572 and an investigator brochure acknowledgement, among other things. So again, this will vary per study, per sponsor, but in general, these will be the documents that you'll need just as a base. And I recommend that you use the same name across documents. So if Susan M. Jones has her name written that way on her CV, then put Susan M. Jones on the financial disclosure form and on the 1572. Because if you start using name variations, it's more likely the sponsor or the contract research organization will kick those documents back to you to redo. They'll say, how do I know this is the same person? It's a different name. So again, if you can save yourself future work, try to just use the same names across documents. So I keep talking about the 1572. Most of you probably know what this is. It is an agreement signed by the investigator to provide certain information to the sponsor and assure that they'll comply with FDA regulations related to the conduct of the clinical investigation of an investigational drug or biologic. So this is for investigational drugs and biologics only. You have a device study, there's no 1572, there's no 1572 equivalent. So this is just for investigational drug and biologic studies. This is basically the contract between the investigator, the sponsor, and the FDA. So it's important that the investigator knows what their responsibilities are when they sign this. So just a few quick tips here. First, check the expiration date. You never want to fill this out and realize, oh, the form expired. I have to do it all again. So check the expiration date. You need to just Google FDA 1572 form. You can download the PDF. In box 1, you'll put the PI's full legal name and their work or business address. And again, you're going to want to see this on their CV. If it's a different address, it's not on their CV, there's a good chance that's going to get kicked back with questions, and you might have to redo it. Box 3 is where you provide the address or location of where the investigation will be conducted or clinical data will be generated or collected. This includes the facilities where subjects will be seen and where you'll be performing study procedures. There's that continuation page if you have more than one location like satellite sites, but this is basically where are you seeing your subjects. If you're going to their homes for some reason, home addresses don't need to be added here. That's not what they're talking about. This is really where are you seeing your subjects. It's a little different than box 4, where you're identifying clinical laboratories or testing facilities directly contributing to or supporting the clinical trial. So this is where are you sending labs? Where are you sending, ECGs? Are you sending your subjects for imaging or other testing for the study? So for this, if you are sending all of your labs to a primary lab, you list that primary lab name. So if you're sending your samples to Kaleida, right, go to High Street, they're going to process your blood, but High Street sends a tube to Flint Road. You don't have to list the Flint Road address. You don't have to track down where all of your tests are being done or where your samples are going. You're listing the places where you are sending samples or you are sending specimens. If you are sending subjects, though, to multiple locations, like say you need imaging and you're working with an imaging center and they have locations in the North Towns and the South Towns and the metro area, and you want to maybe use all of them because you don't know where your subjects are going to live, then you have to list the address for the North Town office and the South Town office and the metro office because your subjects are potentially going to each site. So hope that makes sense. In box 6, you're listing anybody assisting the investigator that's making a direct and significant contribution to the data. So generally, these are people who are directly involved in the performance of procedures required by the protocol and the collection of data. It does not include hospital staff or like nurses, residents who provide ancillary or intermittent care, or those staff that are performing their regular duties and do not need direct knowledge of the protocol to do it. So if you're sending your subjects to a phlebotomist and all they know is that fill these tubes, they don't need to know anything about the protocol, then they would not be listed here and in general aren't usually considered study staff because they don't need any direct knowledge of the protocol to do their job. Boxes 5, 7, and 8 are pretty self-explanatory. You're listing the IRB, the title of the study, and the phase. Sometimes this comes pre-populated. I do recommend you just check these fields before you fill out the 1572. People make mistakes. Sometimes you'll have the wrong protocol or the wrong box will be checked, and you don't want to fill it out and get a signature and then realize it's wrong and I have to do it all again. So I recommend you double check these before you start. And of course, box 10 is where the investigator signs. The date convention is month, day, year, and you can use a wet ink signature or an electronic certified signature. No stamps, no, fancy fonts. It's either wet ink or electronic certified. That signature means that the investigator will personally conduct or supervise the study using the current protocol. They'll inform subjects that drugs are investigational and meet the requirements for obtaining informed consent. They're going to report AEs to the IRB and sponsor and maintain adequate and accurate records. And that they've read and understood the investigator's brochure. It's important that the PI knows, what they're signing when they sign this. So here's just kind of like a sample checklist of everything that we talked about, things that you're going to collect from the PI, from other staff, what you need to look for in that central IRB informed consent form, preparing both the central IRB submission if you're using a central and uploading into Click, on creating source documents, which we didn't really talk about. Years ago, sponsors provided those, but they don't anymore. So that's another thing on your to-do list when you're starting a study. And then usually there's other documents you need to collect. If you're using a local lab, you need local lab certs, reference ranges. It always seems to me that you're starting up like 3 studies at once. There's never just one. So I always made like this little checklist, and I put like initials of the staff. And as their documents came in, I would check them off so I could just look and see what was still outstanding. Because otherwise you're combing through emails and like, oh, did that person send their financial disclosure form? Like, oh, did I get their GCP? So I like to use a checklist and just sort of check off when documents came in and like when I sent them to the sponsor. Okay, so if you're not using an affiliate, if you're doing, all of your studies maybe in practice plan space, you're not using any resources from any of our affiliates, then you are pretty much done for paperwork. But if you are using an affiliate or you're located in an affiliate, you still have some more work to do. So first is you are determining if you are using an affiliate resources or services. And if you are, then pricing and billing processes need to be put into place. And again, please use the CRO for this. We can help. You'll want to determine if you need access to an affiliate EMR. This will eventually be Epic. Determine if any of your research staff need to complete a research associate application. So if your research staff are medically credentialed at your affiliate, you don't need to do this. But if you've hired a coordinator or assistants that are not medically credentialed and they will be seeing subjects at an affiliate or going through affiliates' medical records, then a research associate application will need to be completed. And if you're working on a device trial, you may also need to ensure that a purchase agreement is in place between the sponsor and your affiliate. So these are our 2 main affiliates. They're not the only ones. They're just the ones we use most often. Both require that research associate application for non-credentialed staff. Both would require a purchase agreement, potentially for device trials if it's an applicable device trial. ECMC also has a paper application that needs to be complete. And you send that and the protocol, the consent form, and your IRB approval once you have it. Do not wait for IRB approval. Send this as early as you can. But ECMC has an extra step of completing the paper application, and then you actually get a letter from the Office of the Medical Director that says your study's been approved. CLIDA has the same process, but they don't actually have a paper application. This is really reviewing those resources needed, services, pricing, things like that. It's not like an ethical review. If you're using one of these affiliates, a facility use agreement does need to be activated in Click Agreements before you begin enrollment. This is not really something that site staff does. This is something that really happens between contracts and the CRO. So you don't really need to do that. Just know that that is something that does need to happen. Same thing with the purchase agreement. So a fully signed purchase agreement should be executed between the affiliate and sponsor if your study requires that before you begin enrollment. And that process can be facilitated by the CRO. So that's not something that you are doing, but just be aware that that may need to be done if that's the kind of study you're conducting. So here's kind of a flow chart if you're using a local IRB, everything that we talked about from entering your studies into CSR. CRO creates the IRB submission and uploads your agreements. It's your job to complete and verify the docs like the calendar, the Encore calendar, and your coverage analysis. Make sure your budget and contract are going to be finalized and activated. Submit to the UB IRB. And then if you're working with an affiliate, make sure that that process is complete. This is very similar to a central IRB, except you have one more step there of completing that central IRB submission, which involves incorporating the UB ICF language into your central IRB ICF. Those red line changes go to the sponsor. The sponsor has to approve the changes, before you submit. But when you do submit, you'll be uploading that redlined ICF. You'll be uploading your partially signed reliance agreement and then any other site-specific documents. When that's approved, that gets uploaded into Click along with the fully signed reliance agreement. So is there another question?
They were just asking if you could share the slides
Yes.
after.
Yes. Yeah. And if you, I can even just send you like this will come as like a PDF, but if you want me to send you this so you can like alter it, this isn't like a definitive guide. It can vary per study. So if you want this in a form where you can edit it, I can send that to you as well. So preparing for site activation. So what UB really wants you to have before you begin enrollment is either IRB approval if you're using UB, or that site activation emails, the RA confirmation and the notice of study activation. A signed coverage analysis, active agreement and Click agreements, which can only happen once the budget is finalized. And if you're working with an affiliate, that facility use or premise agreement needs to be activated. Research committee approval from ECMC if applicable, and a purchase agreement if applicable. All those things should be in place before you begin enrollment. Of course, you know about city training, COI disclosures. Obviously, that needs to be done by your study staff before either of the things in this previous slide can happen. And then the sponsor requires for activation training, right? You're going to have to complete protocol training for the sponsor. That might be documented electronically on one of their platforms, or an old-fashioned training log where they have signed, written and signed their name. Their trainer has written and signed their name, and you write down the dates and when it was done and what was reviewed. You probably need vendor training, right? IXRS or EDC. Seems like studies have 10 vendors now, and they all need training. So that's a significant amount of time. You need a completed and signed delegation of authority log. Sometimes have different names, but it's where the PI has delegated the duties of the study. Make sure you have access to your vendor websites, you've received your supplies, and then you've either had a site initiation visit or you've gotten that green light email that says, go ahead, you can begin enrollment. Please notify the Encore team of this date, because this date determines when your study gets activated into Encore and you can begin entering subjects. And of course, other requirements, this is going to vary per study, per sponsor, but this is in general what you'll need, almost with every study. Here's another kind of checklist. Clearly, I love a list. I don't want to have to keep thinking about, did I do this? I want to see a list. Did I check it off? It's done. I don't need to think about it anymore. So create your own. If you want me to send you one that you can edit. It's not a definitive list. But finding a way that you can track all these documents can really go a long way, because like I said, it always seems you're starting 3 studies at once, and it's so hard to keep track of all of this. So whatever works for you, please find a system. And if you need, ideas or templates, let me know. So If there are changes either during or after a study startup, there are some things to do. So usually there's protocol changes, staffing changes, or location changes. So if there's a protocol amendment, you will be getting a new signed protocol signature page. You'll need new IRB approval. Protocol training certificates for all your staff, whether that's online or you're updating your protocol training log. You may need to redline your ICF, and you may need to update your delegation of authority log. So if you had, maybe there's a change to the protocol where they've added like one questionnaire, 5 visits. It seems like a super minor change. It's no big deal. But you may need to update your informed consent form, depending on the language. You'll definitely have to update your source docs. That's going to be a budget change. So you're going to get a new amendment to your contract and an updated budget. That questionnaire is probably going to have to be added to your delegation of authority log of who, and delegating who's allowed to administer the questionnaire. And it is an update to the Encore calendar. So while that seems like a really minor change and no big deal, it kind of triggers a list of things to do. And this Encore calendar, again, it's going to be especially important for studies in EPIC. Any changes to the protocol that you're going to want to see in EPIC, they're going to have to go through Encore first. So making sure the Encore is updated with the most recent protocol, the most recent consent forms, the most recent calendar is going to be really, really important as we transition to EPIC. And if you do have a new contract or budget, that does get uploaded in the agreements under the existing contract. So whether that's a CTA or an SRA, it gets uploaded there. There's an amendment tab. If you can't click submit, let me know. I'll log in and click submit for you. Once that's submitted, the CRO reviews the budget, the Encore calendar can be updated, and eventually the amendment is activated. If you're adding research staff, right, just add this person, it's no big deal. Well, here are some things to think about. From that new person, you're collecting that CV, right, signed and dated within the last 2 years, a license if they have one, their GCP training and protocol training, and maybe a financial disclosure form. That means you are maybe updating a 1572. You're definitely updating your training log or getting that protocol training certificate. You're definitely updating the delegation log. And that's going to include a start date. Just make sure when you're entering that start date, it is on or after the training date on your training log, because you cannot delegate a duty to somebody who's not been trained on it. So this is going to be an audit finding if your dates are off. So you really want that start date to be on or after your training date. Click IRB gets updated. And then again, Encore, if you have a study in EPIC and your staff needs access to that, then that needs to be updated in Encore. You're sending all of these documents back to the sponsor, right? Anything that's new or updated gets sent to the sponsor. You're requesting access to portals or websites as needed, and you're making sure that that new research personnel has completed all of their UB requirements for training. If you remove staff, so this is actually an easy one. You want to put a stop date on the delegation log. You want to notify the IRB either at the time or with your next modification. And you may want to update your 1572 if the sponsor asks you to, but it's technically not required to update the 1572 when you remove somebody. Of course, if documents do change, they get sent to the sponsor. And if you're adding a location, so you do need sponsor approval to add a location, you're going to identify any staff that may need to be added to the research team and then follow the steps to add them. You're updating the IRB, a 1572 if you're using one. You're identifying any SOPs that need to be put into place regarding communication or transportation, whether it's IP or device or equipment. And then you're sending all those documents to the sponsor. Okay, so there's no QR code, but if you have questions about UB study startup process, who can you ask? Who should you ask first? The PI, ChatGPT, or the CRO? So you can just shout that out. Please reach out to the clinical research office. So My email address is the last one listed here. If you have specific questions, you can reach out to the specific person. But again, if you have questions or you're not sure what to do, please feel free to reach out to me. Okay. So does anyone
Does
have any
anyone have any
questions?
questions?
I have a quick question. Do you believe that formal training might be needed in Epic to conduct research using the new protocol? Because our department seems to, never mind. I
Well,
will talk to, no, I just heard a comment that mostly the clinical people are getting training, and I will battle for training, especially doing research in Epic.
you will need Epic training to use Epic, which is why if you have staff that are going to need access to Epic, and they don't have it, it's important that you identify those staff early so their accounts can be set up and they can complete that Epic training.
That would be me, so I'll work on that. Thank you. I appreciate it.
This is Mary. There is Epic training. I went last week and it was specifically for research staff.
Oh, thank you,
So it
Mary.
is available.
Okay, thank you.
It was mandatory. I'm a Collide employee. It was mandatory. So I'm not, they sent me the invite. So, but yeah, you can definitely get it.
All righty, thank you.
Yeah, and you're going to see again, you'll start seeing these changes in CSR, asking these questions. Another change that will come to CSR is asking who Epic can contact on your study team for these things. So you may want to, to get ahead of things, identify the person in on your team or in your department who's going to be the Epic contact for setting up your research studies there.
I don't see any other questions in the chat, CV, and I don't see anyone's hand raised, so going once.
Was.
Robert, you unmuted yourself. Did you have a question?
Oh no, I'm good.
Okay. Well, if no one has any questions, CV, thank you so much for presenting today, and everyone else, thank you so much for attending.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.